Be respected, be feared, but never hated. Machiavelli's uncomfortable truths about power. Let's cut straight to the absolute core of your deepest, most often unspoken fears, that nagging suspicion, that quiet dread whispering in the back of your mind. You are not truly unconditionally loved. You are at best merely tolerated. Does hearing that articulated so bluntly hurt? It should, because society, in its relentless pursuit of superficial harmony and easy acceptance, has meticulously trained you to desperately seek the approval of others, showering you with platitudes about kindness and likability, without ever adequately warning you that that very pursuit of universal approval often becomes the cruelest, most insidious trap of all. Your entire life, you've likely been bombarded with the message to be kind, to be pleasant, to contort yourself into whatever shape is necessary to earn the affection of those around you. But no one likely ever told you the darkest truth. Unadulterated, boundaryless kindness often serves as an open door, inviting exploitation, manipulation, and ultimately betrayal. When your primary motivation becomes simply to please you inherently, make yourself vulnerable. Every forced smile, every excessively kind gesture offered without discernment subtly exposes you, and silently, almost instinctively, everyone around you begins to unconsciously measure your weakness, calculating precisely how far they can push, how much they can take, before you inevitably break or finally push back. Because deep down, even if you vehemently deny it to yourself, you know that conventional love, especially the kind based on fluctuating affection and approval, is inherently fragile, frustratingly changeable, perpetually subject to capricious whims and fleeting, often irrational emotions. The affection you might painstakingly build over years can tragically crumble in an instant, with a single poorly chosen word, with one perceived mistake you failed to foresee. But fear, particularly, the fear rooted in respect for consequences, operates differently. Fear is not fleeting. It does not depend precariously on fluctuating moods or momentary sympathies. Fear, once established through consistent strength and predictable consequences, becomes deeply engraved in memory, like a psychological scar that never entirely disappears. And let me be crystal clear, I am not advocating for the kind of fear that humiliates, degrades, or inevitably generates simmering hate. No, that kind of fear is ultimately useless, counterproductive, fundamentally self-destructive in the long run. I am speaking specifically about fearful respect, the kind of profound respect born from the clear understanding that challenging you, crossing your established boundaries, comes with tangible, predictable, and undesirable consequences. It's the kind of respect that effectively prevents others from lightly challenging you, not out of terror, but because they intuitively know that crossing that clearly defined line will cost them dearly. Here lies the profoundly uncomfortable truth that almost no one in our modern, often overly sentimentalized culture wants to openly admit in the practical, often ruthless exercise of power, whether in politics, business, or even personal relationships. It is almost always fundamentally safer to be feared in the sense of being deeply respected for your strength and resolve than merely to be loved in the sense of being liked or approved of. History is tragically littered with the examples of leaders, figures of authority, who desperately wanted to be loved by everyone, who prioritized popularity above strength, and who ultimately ended up destroyed, often precisely by those individuals who had previously sworn eternal loyalty and affection. Why? Because excessive, boundaryless kindness is frequently perceived by many, consciously or unconsciously, as inherent weakness. And in this complex, often competitive world, perceived weakness will almost always be exploited. Niccolò Machiavelli understood this harsh reality with unparalleled, almost chilling perfection. And although modern society often publicly pretends to reject his seemingly cynical ideas, secretly, subtly, it practices his core principles more pervasively than ever, often under the guise of sophisticated strategy or effective leadership. You have likely been subtly convinced throughout your life that demonstrating genuine firmness is somehow synonymous with cruelty, that imposing clear boundaries is inherently an act of tyranny or aggression. But ask yourself honestly, who really benefits from perpetuating that specific lie, that deliberate softening of reality? Often it is precisely those who secretly await your downfall, those who patiently, strategically wait for the inevitable moment when you, driven by your desire to be liked, finally drop your guard, lower your defenses, so they can swiftly attack you where it hurts the most, exploiting the very vulnerability created by your excessive kindness. Because although they may masterfully pretend otherwise, people by and large almost always act primarily according to their own perceived self-interests. Loyalty often lasts only as long as it remains convenient or beneficial for them. Respect is typically maintained only as long as they perceive or fear the potential consequences of disrespecting you. The true cunning, the art of effective leadership and self-preservation, lies in possessing the wisdom and discernment to know precisely when to strategically apply force or the credible threat of it, and when to skillfully resort to laws, rules, or established procedures. Because power, as Machiavelli implicitly understood, rests upon two fundamental pillars: laws which serve to set necessary limits and define acceptable behavior, and force, whether physical, economic, or psychological, which ultimately ensures those limits are respected. Laws without credible force backing them up quickly become mere illusions, empty pronouncements that no one takes seriously. Conversely, force wielded without the guiding framework of established laws or principles easily descends into arbitrary barbarism, inevitably awakening resentment and enduring hatred. The truly intelligent leader therefore understands implicitly how to delicately balance both, maintaining order with clear authority, yet possessing the wisdom and restraint to skillfully avoid falling into unnecessary brutality or excessive displays of power that breed only fear and resentment. You may currently perceive this perspective as overly cynical, perhaps even morally cruel, but I urge you look honestly around you at the dynamics playing out in your own life, in your workplace, in the broader world. How many times have you personally witnessed someone demonstrably too good, too kind, too accommodating, ultimately get trampled upon, often precisely by those individuals they had generously helped? How many times have you observed excessive indulgence, a lack of firm boundaries inevitably morph into implicit permission for betrayal, exploitation, or disrespect? And yet, despite witnessing these patterns, perhaps you still naively cling to the comforting belief that simply being loved is enough, that your inherent kindness will somehow magically shield you from betrayal. It won't. The only truly reliable defense against the often harsh realities of human nature and power dynamics is respected authority. An authority built not just on affection, but on a foundation of strength, consistency, and predictable consequences. It requires cultivating a measured fear, a healthy respect for your boundaries that strategically does not cross the line into hatred, but effectively keeps others' potentially destructive ambitions and encroachments safely at bay. True sustainable power is not mere popularity. It is not about being universally loved by everyone or constantly striving to do exactly what they expect from you. True power lies fundamentally in being genuinely respected, and yes, at times, strategically feared in the sense of consequence awareness. Why? Because the respect born from a clear understanding of potential consequences, fear often lasts far longer, proves far more reliable than the fragile, fleeting admiration that superficial love or popularity typically offers. Let me reiterate emphatically, this is not about advocating for becoming a tyrant ruling through terror and oppression. It is about developing a deep, pragmatic understanding of human nature in all its complexities. People, generally speaking, respect what they fear losing, whether it's your favor, your protection, or simply avoiding negative consequences, and often subconsciously despise or take for granted what they consider entirely safe, predictable, and easily exploitable. Human psychology, while complex, often operates on remarkably predictable principles. And here is the uncomfortable yet essential secret. If you genuinely desire to lead successfully, to navigate relationships effectively, to protect yourself from manipulation, you need to learn how to skillfully play with the delicate balance of respect and fear without ever allowing that necessary fear to curdle into irrational, consuming hatred. Because hatred inevitably creates irreconcilable enemies, breeding sabotage and undermining stability. But fearful respect, that carefully cultivated sense of consequence, paradoxically often creates surprisingly loyal followers and stable dynamics. Do you truly desire to be strong, not just perceived as nice? Then you must courageously accept reality as it is, not as you wish it were. Stop desperately seeking universal love as your primary goal. Instead, learn to wisely, strategically manage the perception of fear and consequence. Be fundamentally fair, yes, but always remain firm in your principles and boundaries. Be genuinely kind when appropriate and strategic, but never become carelessly indulgent, inviting disrespect. Always strive to act with cunning foresight, proactively anticipating potential betrayals or challenges, and preparing firm, calculated responses in advance. Because when the inevitable, decisive moment arrives, when you find yourself facing those individuals who secretly or openly wish to see you fall, only your real authority, the authority meticulously built upon a foundation of strength, fairness, balance, and undeniable dignity, will possess the power to keep you standing. And always remember this fundamental truth about human memory and motivation. People remarkably quickly forget the favors you generously do for them, but they never truly forget the respect, particularly the fearful respect that you strategically impose upon them through your unwavering strength and clear boundaries. Machiavelli was undeniably right. Effective, sustainable power will always be safer grounded in respectful fear than precariously built upon the volatile, easily swayed sympathies of mere love or fleeting affection. Learn to master that subtle yet crucial difference, and you will have effectively conquered the very essence of true leadership and enduring influence. True wisdom in leadership and indeed in life lies in understanding that authority should never be perceived as absolute or rigidly unyielding, but rather as inherently strategic. If you always project brute strength, if you constantly rely on overt displays of power, people eventually become desensitized to it, accustomed to it, and paradoxically they stop truly respecting it. It becomes mere background noise. However, if you demonstrate unwavering firmness only at the strategically right moments, when truly necessary to uphold a principle or enforce a boundary, then that very firmness becomes almost legendary, memorable, impactful precisely because of its calculated rarity. Unpredictability is arguably your most faithful, most effective ally in maintaining authority and respect. Why? Because no one genuinely respects a leader who is entirely predictable. Predictability breeds contempt and invites manipulation. Power, true, enduring power, thrives not necessarily on absolute consistency and application, but often on calculated strategic surprise. Think about it for a second, drawing from your own experiences. Who ultimately commands more genuine respect? The authority figure who always punishes transgressions harshly and predictably, or the one who, while generally fair, occasionally surprises everyone with an unexpectedly firm, decisive reaction precisely when everyone assumes they will tolerate a mistake or overlook a transgression? That capacity for strategic unpredictability is where the real art of Machiavellian leadership often lies. It's not about constantly shouting or being aggressive simply to be heard. It's about learning to speak little yet with profound clarity and weight, ensuring that when you do choose to speak, your words are never lightly ignored or easily dismissed. And perhaps the single biggest mistake any aspiring leader, or indeed anyone seeking respect, can make is falling into the trap of desperately trying to please everyone. Whoever becomes fundamentally obsessed with garnering universal approval from others inevitably, tragically loses control over themselves, over their own principles, their own direction. When you frantically try to please everyone simultaneously, you invariably end up pleasing no one truly, and most damagingly, you end up fundamentally betraying your own essence, your core values, your authentic self. The authentic leader, the one who commands lasting respect, understands implicitly that governing, leading, even simply living with integrity often means making uncomfortable decisions. Decisions that not everyone will applaud or immediately understand, but decisions that often, in the quiet reflection that follows, even dissenters will silently recognize as necessary, perhaps even courageous. Think of the truly impactful figures who have shaped history. What ultimately made them memorable? Was it primarily their ability to please the crowds, to cater to popular opinion? Or was it far more often their demonstrated ability to decide coldly, decisively, strategically, precisely when everyone else around them trembled with indecision or fear? Firmness, when accompanied by a demonstrable measure of fairness and strategic respect, rarely leaves anyone truly indifferent in the long run. The leader who perpetually hesitates, paralyzed by the fear of disapproval, inevitably loses all genuine respect. Conversely, the one who acts with considered decision, even if controversially, is often followed, even grudgingly, by those who publicly question their methods. Now I'm going to touch upon a particularly sensitive point, one you might instinctively prefer not to face directly: the inherent loneliness of power. Do you know why truly great leaders, figures who wield significant influence and responsibility, often seem profoundly alone, isolated even amidst crowds? Because real, substantial power almost always implies a degree of loneliness. The higher you ascend, whether in a hierarchy or simply in your own level of self-mastery and clarity, the fewer people will exist who can genuinely understand the complexity of your decisions, the weight of your responsibilities. The fewer people will be capable of accompanying you on your unique path without harboring some degree of hidden resentment, envy, or misunderstanding. That is the often cruel, yet seemingly unavoidable paradox of power. The stronger, the more autonomous, the more self-possessed you become, the fewer people you will likely find who can sincerely stand by your side without projecting their own needs, fears, or agendas onto you. But, and this is crucial, consciously accepting this inherent loneliness ultimately frees you from crippling emotional dependence on others' approval or understanding. And only then, liberated from the constant need for external validation, can you begin to make truly objective decisions free from the distorting weight of others' fluctuating emotions or expectations. Observe honestly your own surroundings, the dynamics you witness daily. How many times have you seen someone potentially capable, someone in a position of authority, ultimately fall precisely because they failed to understand this simple, albeit harsh reality? Power should never be carelessly shared or overly confided in those who do not fundamentally understand its burdens, its responsibilities, its inherent loneliness. Because envy inevitably arises among those who feel excluded or less powerful, and envy not only insidiously robs you of precious energy through subtle sabotage or negativity, but it also frequently sows the poisonous seeds of betrayal. The truly intelligent leader therefore knows how to proactively anticipate this reality. They strategically keep close only those few individuals who have demonstrably proven their unwavering loyalty, specifically during difficult, challenging times, and simultaneously they learn to strategically distance themselves, politely yet firmly, from those individuals who are clearly only present out of convenience, opportunism, or fleeting self-interest. A truly clever leader operating with Machiavellian insight deliberately does not allow others to fully know the entirety of their intentions, their strategies, their vulnerabilities. They consciously maintain a certain necessary distance. They skillfully create a degree of calculated uncertainty. Why? because mystery itself functions as a powerful psychological shield. If you habitually reveal too much of yourself, expose all your plans, lay bare all your weaknesses, you inevitably make yourself vulnerable. People simply cannot effectively harm, undermine, or manipulate what they don't fully know or understand. Always strive to keep something essential of yourself, some core aspect of your strategy or inner world, a secret. Make it so that no one can ever fully confidently anticipate your next move. That cultivated uncertainty will effectively keep everyone around you alert, cautious, respectful, and ultimately keep you strategically protected. However, here is what precious few truly understand about the deeper nature of real power. It is not fundamentally about aggressively accumulating more and more raw force or overt authority. It is far more subtly and effectively about intelligently managing the inherent weaknesses and motivations of others. Identify accurately what truly deeply moves those individuals around you. Their fears, their ambitions, their insecurities, their vanities, and you will possess an almost unrelenting psychological tool to subtly yet powerfully guide their decisions and behaviors in directions that align with your broader objectives. Do you know the hidden secret behind those individuals who always seem to effortlessly get what they want in negotiations, relationships, or professional settings? They often possess an uncanny, almost intuitive ability to understand perfectly what each specific person fears, losing what each individual secretly desires, gaining and precisely how to strategically use those potent emotions to subtly yet effectively guide their behavior. While others naively struggle perhaps through brute force or logical argument alone, vainly attempting to gain approval or impose their will, the truly clever leader focuses their primary energy on understanding deeply what drives others. Machiavelli, let us remember, did not write his often controversial ideas with the intention of creating legions of ruthless tyrants. His primary aim was arguably far more pragmatic: to reveal a fundamental reality about human nature that precious few possess the courage or clarity to face directly. Human beings, he observed, rarely act consistently from pure goodness or selfless altruism. Most of the time, consciously or unconsciously, they act primarily from perceived self-interest. Whoever genuinely understands and accepts this fundamental truth stops living in naive illusions and begins to operate, to lead, to govern from a position of distinct advantage. The deep psychology underpinning Machiavellian leadership, therefore, is ultimately rooted in a profound, albeit perhaps uncomfortable, understanding of human fragility. Our inherent insecurities, our susceptibility to emotion, our often predictable patterns of behavior. This is not necessarily cynical pessimism. It is pure, unadulterated pragmatism. It involves observing human nature without ideological filters, courageously accepting it for what it often is rather than what we wish it were, and then adapting strategically to navigate its complexities effectively. Think for a second honestly. Would you rather people perceive you primarily as inherently good, implying perhaps easily exploitable kindness, or fundamentally as strong, implying clear boundaries and potential consequences? The automatic answer, conditioned by society, is almost always good. But what really happens in practical terms when someone perceives fundamental weakness in you? They invariably take advantage of it, subtly or overtly, almost without exception. True effective strength often lies in demonstrating a controlled kindness, a generosity carefully managed and strategically delivered only when it is genuinely useful or serves a larger purpose. Because if you indiscriminately offer generosity without measure, without clear boundaries, you will soon discover that people begin to demand it as an entitlement rather than feeling grateful for it as a gift. The true danger lies not in possessing the capacity for firmness, but rather in perpetually anxiously doubting when to be firm. Respect is invariably lost in hesitation and indecision, never in clear, decisive action, even if that action is unpopular. Here is the final, perhaps deepest, yet also potentially most disturbing truth about the nature of power. Although power is often intensely enjoyed, desired, pursued, it is never truly possessed completely or permanently. It exists fundamentally as an endless game, an intricate dance where if you allow your guard to drop even for a fleeting moment, someone else, perhaps patiently waiting in the wings, will inevitably seize the opportunity to take your place. You know this truth well, intuitively, even if you have never openly acknowledged it. That persistent feeling of needing to always be alert, that requirement for constant vigilance, that subtle awareness that things could shift at any moment. It likely never disappears completely for those who operate in positions of significant influence or responsibility. And this state of heightened awareness, this perpetual vigilance, far from being merely a burdensome disadvantage, is precisely what ultimately keeps you alive strategically, what ensures you never carelessly drop your guard. It is in essence the unavoidable price of power. Eternal vigilance, the eternal underlying uncertainty that serves as a constant reminder that to maintain balance, to retain influence, you must always be willing, metaphorically speaking, to live comfortably on the very edge of the abyss. But let's venture even deeper now and listen carefully to what I am about to tell you, because it's something few openly admit or fully grasp. Power at its absolute core is ultimately nothing more than a shared illusion. It functions primarily as an implicit agreement established between you and those around you. You possess perceived authority, largely because others believe you do, because they have collectively, often unconsciously, convinced themselves that it should be so based on your projected image, your demonstrated strength, your perceived competence. Force and laws, although undeniably necessary components, ultimately serve primarily as tools to reinforce that fundamental underlying collective belief in your legitimacy. What happens then when someone, or perhaps a significant group, stops believing in your authority? What occurs when that tacit agreement about who truly commands respect and influence suddenly disappears or shifts? Exactly. Your perceived power evaporates, often with startling speed. That is precisely why the single greatest skill of any effective leader, any master of influence, lies in the subtle yet crucial ability to constantly keep that shared agreement alive, to nurture that invisible contract of perceived legitimacy, to skillfully manage it, periodically renew it through demonstrations of competence or strength, and perhaps even strategically challenge it occasionally, e.g., by making a bold, unexpected move just to subtly remind everyone who is ultimately steering the ship. This nuanced understanding is precisely what often differentiates a real sustainable leader from a mere, often short-lived tyrant. The tyrant mistakenly believes they possess absolute inherent power, independent of others' perception. But precisely by believing in this illusion, they inevitably lose touch with the underlying reality of power's consensual nature, overreach their bounds, breed resentment, and ultimately self-destruct. The truly wise leader, conversely, fully understands the inherent fragility of power. They know it is always perched precariously on the verge of breaking, always susceptible to evaporation. If the underlying belief system shifts, and that constant awareness of precarious balance, that perpetual tension paradoxically becomes their greatest source of strategic strength, fostering prudence, adaptability, and a keen understanding of psychological dynamics. So permit me to ask you the final, perhaps most uncomfortable, yet ultimately most important question. Do you really truly desire power itself, with all its inherent burdens, responsibilities, and precariousness? Or is what you really seek merely the illusory security, the perceived comfort and control that you mistakenly believe power promises? Because if your ultimate goal is absolute peace, perfect safety, unwavering tranquility, then you have undeniably entered the wrong game. Authentic leadership, genuine influence, is inherently dangerous, perpetually unsettling, never completely safe. But therein lies its profound beauty, its unique challenge, the very essence that makes it so compelling, so irresistible to those drawn towards shaping reality rather than merely reacting to it. It is precisely within that abyss of uncertainty, within that state of controlled tension, that the truly great figures who genuinely change the course of history often emerge. Those individuals who learn to live comfortably, even thrive in that state of constant tension, who do not flee from inherent risk, but rather manage it strategically, are often the ones who ultimately endure. Always remember this fundamental truth. While you possess power, you will inevitably be walking perpetually on the edge. And precisely because of that precarious position, you will feel perhaps more intensely than ever before that every single step matters, that every decision carries real, tangible consequences. If your primary motivation is merely seeking comfort, this is definitively not your path. But if what you genuinely desire is to truly influence the world around you, to leave an indelible mark, to shape outcomes according to your vision, then you must learn to embrace that inherent discomfort. Master it, perhaps even learn to enjoy the strategic challenge it presents. Because only within that state of constant conscious tension does true enduring greatness lie. If you have come this far, journeying through the often uncomfortable yet illuminating landscape of Machiavellian thought, it is highly likely because within you burns the quiet yet persistent flame of leadership, perhaps nascent, perhaps already developing. A flame that once truly ignited never goes out completely. Now listen carefully, because this concluding insight is key. Greatness in leadership, or indeed in any significant endeavor, does not lie in the impossible pursuit of always being right, of never making mistakes. It lies rather in possessing the resilience and strategic wisdom to know how to move forward effectively, strategically, even when you inevitably lose a battle, face a setback, or make an error in judgment. True victory is not defined by the absence of defeat, by winning always, but rather by the unwavering refusal to never give up entirely in the face of momentary defeat. Deep down, authentic leadership is often simply the profound, tenacious ability to get up time and again after being knocked down, learning from each fall, adapting strategy, and continuing the pursuit. Because those individuals who truly master the psychological art of resurrection, who refuse to be defined by their failures, ultimately become effectively indestructible. Thank you for joining me on this intense, perhaps unsettling, yet hopefully illuminating journey through the often hidden psychology of leadership, the complex interplay of human emotions, and the intricate, often ruthless games of power. If you have made it here to this very end, it is likely because you now understand on a deeper level that life, particularly in the realms of influence and achievement, doesn't automatically reward the one who simply strikes the hardest, speaks the loudest, or possesses the most raw force. It consistently rewards the one who knows best when to strike, when to apply pressure, and crucially, when to strategically retreat, conserve energy, and wait for a more opportune moment. Now, ultimately, it is up to you to consciously choose your role moving forward. Will you remain a passive follower guided by the currents of convention? Or will you strive to become an active leader shaping your own destiny? Will you continue to be a potential strategist, analyzing the game and making calculated moves? Or will you resign yourself to being a perpetual victim of circumstances and manipulation? Will you embrace the challenge of becoming the architect of your own destiny? Or will you remain content as a psychological slave to others' judgments and expectations? If you found genuine value in this exploration, if it challenged your thinking or offered new perspectives, I invite you now to subscribe to the channel right now, because knowledge consciously sought and strategically applied is undeniably power, and there is so much more to discover, to unravel, to understand here. Activate the notification bell so you don't miss anything that is coming. And if you truly understood the deeper meaning woven behind each carefully chosen word in this discourse, I want you now to write this exact phrase in the comments: true strength is invisible. Let's see how many among you have genuinely grasped the subtle essence of Machiavellian power. Effective authority, remember, doesn't offer unnecessary explanations. Why? Because the perceived need to constantly justify your actions inherently reveals underlying insecurity, a lack of confident self-possession. A leader who feels compelled to explain their reasons too much, too often, is implicitly begging for acceptance, seeking validation rather than commanding respect. Never do that. Let your decisions speak for themselves, backed by competence and resolve. That is how you become psychologically indisputable. The psychological key to mastering this dynamic is clear. Your power, your authority should be consistently visible through your actions and presence, but never completely transparent in its inner workings or ultimate intentions. Always consciously leave a little space for the imagination, for calculated mystery, because the human mind, faced with ambiguity, instinctively fills those empty spaces, often with assumptions of competence, respect, perhaps even a degree of admiration or cautious fear. People inherently respect what they don't fully understand, and they instinctively fear what they cannot completely control or predict. Finally, if you desire to truly master the intricate art of leadership, influence, and self-preservation according to the timeless principles illuminated by Machiavelli, you absolutely must understand something absolutely crucial. Power is rarely granted. It is typically taken, earned through strategic action, demonstrated competence, and unwavering resolve. But once taken, once achieved, it requires constant wisdom, vigilance, and strategic adaptation to successfully maintain it. Therefore, always act with intelligence and foresight. Consciously avoid abusing your force or authority unnecessarily, as this breeds resentment and eventual rebellion, but simultaneously never allow anyone to seriously doubt that you possess both the capacity and the unwavering willingness to use it decisively when circumstances demand. Skillfully manage respect through fairness and competence. Wisely manage fear through clear boundaries and predictable consequences. Actively avoid actions that generate enduring hatred. Master this delicate balance, and you will effectively master almost any environment you navigate. In conclusion, always remember this profound psychological reality. Whoever effectively controls the human mind through narrative perception, emotional leverage, ultimately controls reality itself, at least within the social sphere. And those individuals who cultivate a deep, pragmatic understanding of the intricate psychology underpinning respect and fear will likely never be forgotten, never be easily dismissed or overthrown. Now, definitively decide for yourself. What kind of leader, what kind of influential presence do you ultimately aspire to be? One who is primarily loved, yet potentially vulnerable, or one who is strategically feared, respected for strength, yet fundamentally secure? Or perhaps, if you possess sufficient skill and wisdom, can you achieve the delicate synthesis of both at once? But never ever forget that the line separating fearful respect from corrosive hatred is incredibly thin, dangerously fragile. Perpetually dangerous. Tread that line carefully, strategically, wisely, and you will likely become psychologically invincible. The question that really matters now, the one requiring keen self-awareness, is this: can you accurately detect when someone genuinely fears you in a negative, resentful way versus when they truly respect you, perhaps with a healthy dose of consequence awareness? Because countless leaders throughout history and in contemporary life have ultimately fallen precisely by confusing these two fundamentally different concepts. Pure and hard fear, the kind born from tyranny or arbitrary cruelty, generates only momentary obedience. People comply out of a primal survival instinct. But respect, particularly respect earned through consistent fairness, demonstrated strength, and predictable consequences, endures long beyond your immediate physical presence or direct oversight. If someone merely fears you, they will likely do what you say only when you are watching, driven solely by the instinct to avoid punishment. But if someone genuinely respects you, They will often act in accordance with your principles, uphold your standards, even defend your reputation even when you are not physically present. Do you perceive the profound difference? One dynamic relies on external coercion, the other cultivates internal alignment. Obtaining quick results through fear is one thing. Inspiring consistent, intrinsically motivated actions through sincere respect is another, far more sustainable form of influence. Now let's go even deeper into strategic nuance. The true, often underestimated strength of a sophisticated leader lies not just in knowing when to exert pressure, but perhaps, even more crucially, in recognizing when to strategically slightly loosen the reins. Yes, loosen. It seems counterintuitive perhaps, but absolute unrelenting leadership rarely exists effectively in the long term. Constant pressure inevitably exhausts those under its weight, breeds resentment, and paradoxically over time often stops working as people become numb or resistant. Effective authority inherently possesses the wisdom and confidence to strategically step back from time to time, to consciously allow others the space to make mistakes, to grapple with challenges, even to make their own autonomous decisions within defined parameters. Why? Because through this process they often come to realize firsthand just how valuable your overarching vision truly is, how important your strategic leadership genuinely is for maintaining stability or achieving success. If you never permit others the dignity of experiencing their own inevitable mistakes, they will likely never truly deeply appreciate the value of your successes or the wisdom of your guidance. Think about this analogy. The best teacher is rarely the one who simply dictates all the answers, demanding rote memorization. The truly effective teacher is often the one who skillfully provokes the right questions, guiding students towards discovering the answers for themselves. Similarly, the most effective Machiavellian leader in the strategic sense is often not the one who possesses all the immediate ready-made solutions, but rather the one who subtly yet powerfully plants the idea in the minds of their subordinates that without their guiding presence, their strategic oversight, sooner or later, things are likely to fall apart. Cruelty, no strategy. It's about skillfully teaching others to intrinsically value your presence and leadership without needing to constantly heavy-handedly impose it through overt force or micromanagement. When others internalize this understanding, they will rarely question your fundamental importance. They will find themselves wondering, even in your temporary absence, what would the leader do in my place? When you achieve that level of internalized influence, your power no longer requires constant vigilant monitoring because you have effectively installed it within their very minds. Let's now talk briefly about something you may have previously overlooked. The profound strategic subtlety of silence. Machiavelli explicitly stated many things about power, but he also masterfully hinted at others conveying volumes without needing to state them directly. Strategic silence is perhaps your single most potent, yet most frequently underestimated weapon. Do you know why? Because silence inherently forces the other person to nervously fill those uncomfortable gaps, often with their own anxieties, their hidden assumptions, their revealing insecurities. When you consciously choose to remain silent, particularly at a tense moment, you effectively put the other person in the psychologically vulnerable position of desperately trying to interpret your thoughts, generating a slight yet incredibly powerful undercurrent of anxiety within them. Suddenly, without uttering a single word, you can have everyone hanging precariously on your anticipated next reaction, subtly controlling the emotional temperature of the room. This technique is as exquisitely subtle as it is undeniably powerful. Remember, whoever effectively controls the silence often controls the underlying tension of the moment, but exercise caution. This tension should never be allowed to escalate uncontrollably or break abruptly into overt hostility. Excess can easily generate irrational fear, breeding resentment, and that is precisely when you begin to lose ground strategically. Irrational fear quickly metastasizes into enduring hatred, and once someone genuinely hates you, that hatred becomes a constant, often hidden source of potential sabotage. The intelligent leader never allows the dynamic to reach this dangerous extreme. Therefore, meticulous attention to detail is absolutely key. You must constantly measure the emotional atmosphere you are generating in others. You must possess the acuity to perceive precisely when you are approaching the limit of productive tension, and just then strategically slightly relieve the pressure. Perhaps show a small, unexpected gesture of empathy or understanding, offer a minor concession. But crucially, never completely lose control of the overall situation or your strategic objective. Another invaluable tool, one rarely mentioned with sufficient clarity in discussions of power, is the strategic administration of praise delivered with surgical precision. Yes, praise, but never overpraise. Never give praise freely, carelessly, or undeservedly, because when you dispense praise too often or too easily, it inevitably loses all its motivational value, becoming expected and meaningless. Instead, if you administer genuine praise sparingly, thoughtfully, only when truly warranted, it will often be remembered with dazzling clarity and profound impact. Precise praise delivered sincerely at the right moment for a specific achievement often generates a sense of loyalty far stronger and more enduring than 1,000 empty threats ever could. It functions as a powerful emotional reward, confirming to the other person that they are on the right path and that you, the discerning leader, are specifically recognizing their effort and contribution. But always remember, administer praise carefully. It is a precious psychological commodity that should be given with extreme moderation and strategic intent to maintain its potency. And here we arrive at another crucial topic you may have previously overlooked: the intelligent strategic management of your rivals. Because rest assured, you will have rivals. Successful or influential people always do. Some you will know overtly. Others will operate more subtly, perhaps hidden in the shadows. What then should you strategically do with them? The very first principle is to understand that the most dangerous rival is often the one who doesn't yet know that you have already detected their ambition or potential opposition. Resist the easy, often tempting impulse to immediately quickly eliminate anyone who opposes you openly. Instead, strategically let them exist for a reasonable period. Allow them to perhaps challenge you slightly, publicly even. Let them create certain doubts, perhaps even awaken a slight fear among others regarding your position. Why? Because that rival, entirely without knowing it, is effectively working for you. They are constantly publicly reminding everyone around you just how dangerous, how potentially costly it can be to face you directly. Their eventual failure, when it finally inevitably happens, perhaps subtly orchestrated by you, perhaps simply due to their own missteps, will serve as the powerful public confirmation of your superior power and strategic acumen. Their downfall becomes your silent, undeniable victory. Let your rivals unknowingly, unwittingly feed your authority. Now ask yourself honestly, how much time do you genuinely dedicate to meticulously analyzing the behavior, the subtle cues, the hidden motivations, the underlying patterns of those individuals around you? Because the truly effective leader is first and foremost an absolutely unrelenting observer of human nature. You must cultivate the ability to detect subtle patterns, decode fleeting reactions, interpret almost imperceptible gestures that often reveal true hidden intentions. Whoever masters this intricate art of observation ultimately masters the art of psychological leadership as well. It ultimately doesn't matter how many brilliant strategies you devise if you lack the fundamental capacity for absolute control over your own observation skills. Observe without reacting immediately. Absorb information without prematurely revealing your own hand or intentions. Let them think. Perhaps you haven't noticed their subtle maneuverings. Let them feel safe, acting, revealing themselves in front of you. Then, precisely when they least expect it, strategically use that carefully gathered information to your decisive advantage. Surprise is always your most valuable trump card. Finally, let's confront an uncomfortable yet crucial reality. Sooner or later, every leader, every figure of authority, inevitably faces the temporary loss of authority, moments of crisis, periods of undeniable vulnerability. How you choose to react in those specific moments often defines your authority more profoundly than all your previous victories combined. When that inevitable crisis arrives, consciously choose to stay calm, remain outwardly cool, collected. Never lose your fundamental composure, even if internally you feel turmoil. Because if you panic, if you overtly show fear or indecision, that is the precise moment when you truly risk losing all accumulated respect. But conversely, if you manage to react calmly amidst the surrounding chaos, if you demonstrably maintain your authority and clear-headedness, even during the worst moments, you will then often exponentially increase the profound respect others hold for you. Never forget, a leader is ultimately judged not primarily by how they act when everything is going well and circumstances are favorable, but fundamentally by how they handle the impossible situations, the moments of intense pressure and uncertainty. The world is full of individuals who confidently boast authority only when everything is comfortably in their favor. But those rare individuals who are truly remembered, who genuinely go down in history as indisputable leaders, are invariably those who demonstrate the remarkable ability to stay firm, centered, and decisive, precisely when everyone around them has succumbed to fear and panic. In summary, never forget this profound psychological reality. Leadership is much more than a mere position or a formal title. Leadership is a constant, intricate dance with complex human emotions, with the delicate balance of earning respect, and with the strategic, carefully measured application of fear-consequence awareness. There exist no absolute, universally applicable formulas, only precise, context-dependent strategies skillfully adapted to the inherent complexities of human behavior, which is and always will be intricate, fragile, and fundamentally unpredictable. Now tell me, after all of this deep, perhaps unsettling exploration, are you truly, genuinely ready to assume real power, the kind of power that comes not just from external authority, but from a deep understanding of psychology and the application of Machiavellian cunning? Think carefully before you answer, because once you consciously choose to take it, once you step fully onto this demanding path, there will likely be no turning back to the comfortable illusions of naive goodness. Never.